Will the meeting come to order, please? I'm going to ask for the roll call. We have a couple of people on the telephone with us who aren't present today.
Curator Bradley.
Here.
Curator Carnahan. Curator Downing is absent today. Curator Erdman.
Here.
Curator Frazier.
Yes, here.
Curator Good.
Here.
Curator Haggard.
Yes.
Curator Russell.
Here by teleconference.
Thank you. And Curator Wassinger. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the University of Missouri, Kansas City. On behalf of the Board of Curators, I'd like to thank the campus, Chancellor Morton, the faculty, staff, and all the students for their kind hospitality during our visit. It's very special for me. This is where I was born and raised, so coming back to my roots makes it even more special. This meeting is a bit unique today for a number of reasons. It is our first board meeting in the new year, and we will hear from President Forsey in a few moments on the state of the university, which will be live video streamed on the web. So we'd also like to welcome all of those who are watching us via the internet, as well as those who are following us on Twitter. You may recall that during my remarks in December at the board meeting, I indicated I will focus my board chair remarks on e-learning. And I do so for a number of reasons. As a graduate of the University of Missouri St. Louis who received her master's degree through distance education, this is obviously a topic that is near and dear to my heart. But perhaps more importantly, I believe e-learning is the future of higher education and worthy of all the attention we can give it. So to frame my remarks, let me remind you of some staggering statistics mentioned during yesterday's Academic, Student, and External Affairs Committee. In fall 2003, approximately 1.9 million students were taking an online class. In fall 2009, that number has increased to 11.9 million students taking some or all of their classes online. Moreover, 21.9% of all students at degree-granting post-secondary schools were taking at least one online course in 2007, up from 9.6% in 2002. While these statistics may guide and drive our actions, let's not forget why we should continue to invest in e-learning. Meet Tracy Brookshire, a working mother, has 2 children, been out of school for 15 years before taking advantage of UMKC's distance education program in dental hygiene. She was able to do her coursework after her children went to bed, and she took her class sessions in the evenings. Now full of confidence after receiving her bachelor's completion degree, she has begun work on her graduate degree and is even paying it forward by becoming a clinical instructor herself. Here's what Tracy says. For 15 years, I took my kids to school. I went to work in a busy general practice office caring for my patients' oral health and educating them on ways they could improve their home care. I loved my job then, and I love my job now. The difference is I now love my life too. Needless to say, the time is now for the University of Missouri to expand its e-learning program. The time to pave the way for all students, traditional and non-traditional like Tracy, who learn in different ways, through different mediums, and on different time schedules. It's now. And now is the time to think about how best to incorporate the general tenets of e-learning, including a reliance on technology and traditional classroom settings as well. Students like Tracy are why e-learning is so important, and thanks to the leadership of President Forsey and the oversight of Steve Graham, the university is well on its way to stepping up its e-learning efforts to help thousands more students. As Steve mentioned yesterday during our Academic, Student, and External Affairs Committee meeting, the university recently hired distance learning consultants to help guide our upcoming efforts. Their recommendations are highlighted on the screen, and in the coming weeks and months, The university will determine how best to implement these very critical steps. Focus will be given to building a technology infrastructure, including a web portal that allows for course access and an anytime help desk and tutoring services. Instructional designers on each campus will help kickstart the growth and development of campus e-learning capacity by helping to harness the myriad of rich tools and information available to the instructors today. Faculty development programs will be designed to assist faculty in expanding their understanding of not only available technology and courseware management, but also the development and delivery of the online course itself. Finally, the creation of a faculty fellow mentoring program. It will be established and it will provide to selected faculty the opportunity for training, for conference travel to expand knowledge of e-learning trends and opportunities. Certainly, much work lies ahead, but the opportunities to expand educational opportunities in traditional classroom settings or for students like Tracy abound. It is exciting, fruitful work, and I look forward to being able to update you on our progress throughout the year. Thank you for your time this morning. President Forsey, I turn the podium to you.
Well, thank you, Curator Haggard, and good morning to everyone. We have a real hybrid communication opportunity this morning with those of you here in the room, those via the web, and certainly to curators Russell and Wassinger via the phone, so a multimedia opportunity. I would encourage everyone, at least in the room here in Kansas City, to perhaps hover around the screen to ease the view of the charts. There may be copies available in the back of the room for those of you that want to take advantage of that, and the rest of you can follow along on the screen via the web or in the room here. You know, it's a pleasure and honor for me to be with our faculty, with our staff and students, like here this week at our Board of Curators meeting at UMKC. Always an opportunity that I look forward to. I appreciate the opportunity to present an annual report, if you will, today on our University of Missouri. Normally, communication should be a good two-way with a good balance of talking and listening. My apologies for skewing toward one-way communications this morning in my limited time with you. I do intend for my comments to be directed to the Board of Curators, who dedicate so much of their time, so much passion, and at least in my past 2 years, patience, which I have much appreciated. My comments are also directed to all of our constituents, all of those who serve and all of those that we serve in this great state of Missouri. You know, there are so many individuals and groups that I'd like to thank for their support in this past year and for their ongoing recognition of the role the University of Missouri plays in our state. From our Governor Jay Nixon to the General Assembly leadership, Senators Shields, Mayer, and Pierce, and Representatives Richard, Isett, and Kingery, and particularly to the delegations surrounding our campuses, I want to thank them for their tireless work in support of what we do. To our federal delegation, especially Senators Bond and McCaskill, and to all of our campus supporters, friends of the university, alumni, thank you as well. To the lifeblood of what we're about, our faculty, staff, and students, your continued commitment to excellence, your continued commitment to integrity and social responsibility hasn't been nothing short of extraordinary. This morning I'd like to recap 2009. Our accomplishments and challenges were many, as you know. I will talk about commitments, talk about challenges, talk about obligations as shared responsibilities for all of us. I will look to this year and the future with a focus on our priorities and with optimism, tempered with the diligence we need to have in the context of the economic challenges that our state and nation continue to face. Our mission is clear, and it is historic in how we uniquely serve the citizens of our state. Sometimes the awareness of this mission isn't as uniform in all corners, but I am convinced that staying true to this charge and doing it with quality and excellence is the best way to achieve our objective of making a difference. You know, at each Board of Curators meeting, I've asked our 4 chancellors to spend just a few minutes to provide their own bragging rights on accomplishments. And I will tell you, it's very tempting this morning to kind of let our time be devoted to bragging about what was accomplished last year. But I will be brief instead and ask that all of us be mindful of the effort made by all involved in the university last year, our land-grant research institution, our University of Missouri. A lot was accomplished. In our mission of teaching, record enrollment on all 4 of our campuses. Pretty amazing that 13,000 students have been added, if you count all aspects of that, in the past decade, a 24% increase in our mission of teaching. Our faculty have been recognized ranging from election to the National Academy of Science to the Priestley Medal. So congratulations to Dr. Robert Rickliffs and Fred Hawthorne. And just this week, Dr. Sandra Abel was named Distinguished Fellow by the National Science Teachers Association. Many of our departments also received national ranking status. Yesterday at UMKC, we heard that preparing our students for teachers, the Institute for Urban Education program, is just one of dozens of examples that we have where we're preparing preparing our mission of teaching and outreach for the future. In our mission of service, our Caring for Missourians leadership among Missouri's 4-year public education institutions will produce more than 220 new and temporary positions for students in healthcare professions from our University of Missouri. Over 1,400, by the way, totally across all 4-year public and 2-year institutions in the state. Extension Services pitched in last year with added emphasis on small business support, growing and protecting Missouri jobs. And by the way, there are a multitude of service learning initiatives taken on by our students, such as Engineers Without Borders, and service that we heard last night at the UMKC Dental School. Almost $7 million in in-kind support is provided for those most in need in our state. In our mission of research, the spotlight is shining on all 4 of our campuses with federal grant applications and awards at record levels. Disclosures are up 18% for intellectual property pursuits, and we achieved more than $300 million in externally sponsored research, with Mizzou and its $205 million ranked roughly in the top 10% of over 600 institutions on this measure. And last year, the university committed an additional $2 million towards staff and related technology commercialization activities, a very clear signal of intent for the future. In 2004, the 4th component of our mission was added, our role in economic development. And this time in our economy, its relevance has never been more important. We highlighted in our Energy Summit last April the capabilities of that field for all to see. In addition to that, though, I'd like to thank George Paz at Express Scripts, Neil Patterson at Cerner, General Greg Martin at Fort Leonard Wood, and David Stewart at Worldwide Technologies for their confidence in the University of Missouri and in our ability to be a good partner with these important Missouri-based enterprises. Foundations like Kauffman and Reynolds continue to be supportive of our leading-edge initiatives at the UMKC's Block School and at Mizzou's J School, respectively. You know, the response of our supporters in this toughest of economic times perhaps shouldn't have been a surprise, in that we surpassed in all cases last year our fundraising requirements and expectations. Topped off by the $1 million for all we call Mizzou campaign celebration in April, and Missouri S&T hitting its goal of $200 million 5 years before the end of the campaign was scheduled. A lot accomplished, and you'll hear more from Mike Nichols in a little bit about the economic development activities of the university. Our ongoing relevance to help businesses start up in or relocate to Missouri is evidenced by this graphic showing the 12 locations now operating or planned, supported in these endeavors by the University of Missouri. We are advocates of Governor Nixon's jobs initiative, as well as MOSIRA legislation, which focuses on creating jobs in science and technology fields. So again, something very important, that we are a key partner with the state and have, again, responsibility for infrastructure around the state that enables that to occur. On top of these core mission achievements, we took on many additional actions. We believe those will accrue benefit to our university and to the state. We have held tuition flat last year and have proposed again for this coming year. We are leading the way, I believe, nationally with a performance management system as well as a comprehensive set of campus-specific accountability measures. Our brand, if I can use that term, is enhanced by our student athletes on all 4 of our campuses. At Mizzou, that was apparent with 4 Big 12 conference titles last year, an Elite 8 run in basketball, and the 5th straight postseason football game, along with our student athletes leading all BCS schools in their academic progress report standard. Quite an accomplishment. But with all that, we asked ourselves last year, and continue to do that, by the way, is there more we can do in these times? Can we be even more relevant to the state and help be part of the solution to the challenges that our state and our nation faces? So we took on myriad additional activities positioned at that question. 2 task forces were aimed at the heart of our mission of teaching and learning. We have set the stage for the future of healthcare technology and excellence in patient care with the Tiger Institute supporting our MU Health System in partnership with the Cerner Corporation. We will take a proactive approach in each of our campus cities to seek new, innovative community campus partnerships to accelerate finding the creative solutions for our capital needs. All of this, I believe, has been significant, perhaps even unprecedented profile of engagement and results. It was done in the context of one of the most challenging backdrops that I have seen in my working career. And the constant headlines of economic peril of our country and our state had an impact on everything we did, as it did for every one of our internal and external constituents. We needed to act, and we did. We did not always perfectly execute or perhaps perfectly communicate, but we had the mindset of staying ahead, of looking around the corner to keep our mission strong. Thus, our actions began in 2008, in the fall of 2008 precisely, freezing positions and holding them open, reaching a peak of more than 600 positions that were held open, reaching agreement with the state on tuition and state revenue support. Tough decisions were taken on salaries and on benefits. And the outcome thus far is perhaps not as draconian as actions of others around the country, but I do accept, given some of the actions that we took, that may be, in fact, in the eye of the beholder. Some of our actions were very tough. At the same time, there has become a very vocal national discussion. You heard that from the President's State of the Union address this week about higher education. And it juxtaposes the combination of rising cost of a degree and the job market for graduates that has crashed dramatically around the country. All of these issues are very important for us to be engaged in, to have our own point of view established, and on many of them to, in fact, take action. These are national issues, but as you can imagine, those issues in Missouri are a mirror image. So as we move into this 3rd year of the recession cycle, it will continue to be challenging to fulfill all aspects of our mission. We have agreed again to hold in-state undergraduate tuition flat, but that is in exchange for a $24 million cut to our core budget. We will also incur a $15.5 million cut, or roughly 30%, on our non-core category activities. These so-called non-core activities, however, include funding for University Hospital, funding for telemedicine, and funding for the statewide education broadband network, MoreNet. And as we know, as we look to 2012, absent a recovery in state revenues, another $24 million in federal stimulus money that today is in our budget, in our core budget, may be at risk. So this raises obviously very important planning questions for us. How do we prioritize our activities and our investments? How do we prepare for 2011 and 2012 in this context? But with all that as background, we remain confident and we remain investors in our state of Missouri and in our University of Missouri system. Our collective stewardship of this university has never been stronger, and it should give us confidence to invest as we have in the past in our infrastructure. Our $330 million bond and debt service initiative last year allows us to take care of critical infrastructure needs, allows us to deal with maintenance and repair on our 4 campuses, to invest in our strategic initiatives as we've done last year on economic development and are making progress on e-learning. And in our students, by foregoing increases that would have amounted to a cumulative $70 million over 5 years if we had adjusted tuition only by inflation. $70 million invested in our students if we had made adjustments in tuition by inflationary amounts. Those issues can make a difference. To fully do our part in the state to help build sustaining job growth and revenue growth, we are taking another investment step today. We are announcing that we will provide up to $5 million over the next 3 years in the University of Missouri Enterprise Investment Initiative. This program will support our researchers and faculty and those who may rely on university researchers to start up or stand up new companies in Missouri, to grow new jobs and create revenue streams for the university and, importantly, for the state. This kind of investment, in our view, is just one of many obligations that we take seriously in our stewardship role. It is the Missouri way of doing things, by the way. Our obligations cut across all of what we should be about: carrying out our mission with quality, ensuring accountability to our stakeholders, providing access and affordability for students as part of our land grant mission, and respecting our faculty and staff as we engage them to find solutions. But I would submit to you that there is another set of obligations where we have to rely on and be supported more broadly by the state. And in this context, not just the General Assembly, not just the governor, but all of us have to recognize as citizens the role education plays in our state's past, and importantly or critically, the role that education will play in our future. So the question to citizens of Missouri: do we value education, and are we willing to make it a priority? Do we collectively accept the obligation as stewards of public education and the investment, not just in dollars, required to keep that strong? So whether it's partnering with state leaders to leverage Missouri's balance sheet for accessing the capital markets, or partnering with the state and other institutions in our state for federal research support, these opportunities, in my view, require this notion of a shared obligation to make things work better. So in that regard, let me be very clear. Higher education needs money and support for its capital project needs. The specifics have been clear and well documented across this university, and by the way, our four-year public colleagues across the state. Whether it's classroom space, antiquated labs, the need for science and engineering buildings to be updated, maintenance and repair, the full gamut of needs have been identified. There will be no better time for the state to access the capital market via a bond initiative to address these capital needs than now. We have a AAA rating. We need to put that to use. Rates are still at historic lows, and there are incentives to move now. We are actually rolling off the 35-year-ago bond issue and its debt service. So education needs to lay claim to that line item. There would be, in essence, no new debt and no new debt service by simply rolling over the amounts that today are in the state's budget. Jobs, real jobs in construction, would be created. The window will close likely this year, and I think that's well understood nationally and within our state. So the question is, what will Missouri do? What kind of stewards collectively will we be for the next generation, looking ahead, looking around the corner? You know, it's easy to look back and look in the rearview mirror sometimes and be critical. And in tough times and the challenging times we've had in the past year, couple of years, maybe that's not even fair. But the facts are that several years ago, public higher education accepted more state oversight of outcomes that we would be providing in exchange for capital project funding, 3 years of increased financial support, recognition of needed equity adjustments to strike a balance amongst four-year public institutions, a funding model that would recognize inflation support and enrollment growth, and incremental funding for a scholarship program called Access Missouri. So far, now, as we look in that rearview mirror, we have received 2 years of that incremental funding, which has not yet gotten us back to 2001 absolute funding levels. During that time, as I already stated, we have grown our enrollment by 24% just in our University of Missouri system with no new state support. And while a select group of lobbyists will tell you otherwise, my sampling of Missourians says that we should be shocked that the Access Missouri Scholarship Program implemented during that cycle can now support a student going to a public institution by $1,500 per student per year and $3,150 for a student to go to a private institution on what is now a $90 million scholarship fund. So again, looking back in that rearview mirror, certainly, as we made those agreements, not the balance we would have expected for the results of Senate Bill 389. While no one, including me, likes to talk about taxes, let me put it in different terms. Let me put it in terms of state revenue either foregone or perhaps diverted. Again, facts are that since 1997, thanks to a series of a la carte tax policy changes, state revenues have been reduced by $800 million. In 1 year alone last year, more than $500 million in tax credits were applied, again, diverting state revenues, in many cases, by the way, to very worthy projects. Make no mistake about that, very worthy projects. However, that's a total of $1.3 billion in revenues foregone or diverted by our state. So again, back to this notion of commitments and obligations. Could some of this revenue leakage have been used to fund or build a new state cancer hospital to replace our state's 50-year-old Ellis Fischel Cancer Center? Could some of that money have been used to plug holes in our budget for programs like telemedicine, where we link Missouri's underserved rural areas and healthcare patients with the state's best healthcare professionals? Could some of that money have been used to keep the light burning on science, engineering, math, and technology programs which are being cut in public elementary and secondary schools? Could some of that money be found to sustain caring for Missourians by continuing to educate more healthcare professionals, including programs that are now in jeopardy, like the joint pharmacy program between UMKC and Missouri State that leverages infrastructure that's been built and could be extended very efficiently? So again, not advocating tax increases this morning, talking about the need to understand what has happened to our revenue picture in this state. There are no easy decisions here, only hard choices, but we can't not have this discussion in our state. It has to be part of our conversation. This chart I've used several times in these board meetings. By now, it's termed my favorite chart. Probably a long story associated with that. But this chart shows a myriad of data from student growth to growth in tuition to state appropriations, and indicates now over the past decade a 31% efficiency improvement. A 31% efficiency improvement. I believe it's a telling chart. And I think it harkens back to the question, are we good stewards of the investments that have been made in our university system? But it also raises the question of how will our mission be affected in the next 2 years? Can we sustain that type of continued efficiency improvement without impact on the mission of those we serve, of teaching, of research, of economic development, and service? So the record, I believe, clearly shows that we've been doing a lot more with less, and have avoided thus far a slip in quality and that slippery slope of doing less with less. So the choices we've made thus far and the stewardship of the university, I think, bode a very good story by this chart, but the question is about the future. As always, I believe we need to look at the challenges first amongst ourselves. In October, I suggested a number of areas that represent part of the national discussion about the value of higher education that should be examined. We will need to test these paradigms with our best thinking and shared governance approaches. As a result, I've asked our campus and system leadership to shine a spotlight on these points in 2010 and give us their best thinking during the course of the year. You've heard a lot about e-learning in the past 24 hours already. I've asked Chancellor Deaton and the system office to partner on that important initiative. Degree completion strategies, again, part of the national discussion about how do we get more of our citizens through the pipeline. I've asked UMKC and Chancellor Morton to provide, or excuse me, UMSL and Chancellor George to provide leadership on that important initiative. Being sure that there's a clear pathway for students in junior high school community colleges, and within our own campus systems to be sure that they can have a chance to get that degree. I've asked UMKC, Chancellor Morton, and Provost Hackett to take a look at this particular issue. Outside in, we had a task force last year that was attempting to ensure that we were meeting the needs of national and Missouri employers. I want to focus that even more finely on areas that will clearly represent job growth in the future around math, engineering, technology, and science needs. I've asked Missouri S&T in partnership with the other 2 engineering schools in our system to look at that. And the entire system will take a look at this issue of a 3-year degree cycle. And by the way, that cycle is not to devalue our degree or cause less hours to be required or created. It's to ensure that for those students that want to accelerate their process, that we have a very efficient way for that to occur. You know, 2 years ago, shortly after I began in this role as president of the Missouri system, I had a chance to have lunch with a man who has been one of our state's recent great philanthropists, entrepreneurs, supportive education, and benefactor to our university. During that lunch, Des Lee, then 90 years old, looked across the table and asked me very directly, and I found out later that was his M.O., "What's your plan? What are you going to accomplish in your first year? What's your 5-year plan? How can I help?" Now, again, this is 2 months on the job, and I was still finding my way around Highway 70 and 63. In our subsequent few times together, it was pretty clear you better have some answers to Des's question. Desmond Lee, as you know, passed away a few weeks ago, and I shared with his son Gary my discussions with his father and my conclusions. You better show up with passion. You better take your stewardship seriously, and hope is not a plan. What's your plan? You better be the loudest advocate for your mission. So, ladies and gentlemen, I believe we do have a plan. It will require our collective stewardship, our passion. I believe the work that's been done by all of us to ensure that our accountability measures, our access and success are transparent, are front and center in all we do, will provide that reference point. But rest assured, our ability to anticipate those changes around us and to lead and to do that with advocacy will be the measure that will be held to. I'm reminded that we are a very special interest group, and our advocacy and collective voice must be heard. Our state depends on it, our constituents depend on it, and I want to thank you for your continued support. Thank you. It's my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Mike Nichols, who will provide an annual report on our economic development activities. Mike?
Thank you very much, Gary, and good morning, everyone. I'm very excited today to talk to you about the major accomplishments that we have made in this past year. This is due to the efforts of many individuals across the campuses and our partnerships across the state to lower the barriers to university economic development. Aside from social and economic aspects, which are derived from the development of human capital, which we commonly think of as teaching, you will see today the significant contributions to the job creation and economic vitality in the communities where our campuses are located and the diffusion of this impact across the state. On your desks, you should have a copy of our annual report, where you will read about some of the faculty on each campus that have dreamed big and just how these dreams have unfolded into bigger results. One of the most difficult aspects of this was, in fact, choosing among the hundreds of potential faculty and students to place in this report. But it means we have a good amount of data to be used in many years. We highlight throughout the report the record outcomes based on leveraging the assets of research, intellectual property, and research parks as they contribute to our efforts for commercialization opportunities. I also want to point out our web address on the back of the report, where you also find, among other things, video clips of our Research Board Award winners. These awards go mostly to assistant professors who are coming into the university many times without the ability to have seed capital to get their research going and get it off the ground so that they can then apply for NSF or NIH type grants. So this is a very, very important aspect. They have testimonials about how this has influenced their research. And you might back up. Yeah. And what it means to them to receive these awards. Also, we list the addresses for technologies available for licensing, where one can enter keywords or phrases and access our patent database. So if you wanted to be able to find out what is going on in nanoscience and what we have patented, one can go to that site, type in that keyword, and up will become the patents and a little description of each of those. I want to take this opportunity to thank those in the communications group and my staff for the hard work and creativity that went into the production of this very professional report. Today I will be covering three broad themes: research, IP management, and research park or facilities development, to showcase the economic impact of the university system, where we have been, stay back, benchmarks and highlights of our successes. We also want to see where we're going. On this slide, you will see the 5 areas that encompass our work to remove barriers and provide for a return on our investment with the campuses and the stakeholders. What are these barriers? Number 1, lack of funding to develop or produce products and services with a proof of concept model. This past year, we provided over $600,000 in 12 awards out of about 100 applications in order to do just this. Second, access to seed and venture funding for startups. This has been very limited in the past, and as you heard the President say just a minute ago, we are committing to up to $5 million in order to move this initiative forward. We have also lacked funds at many times in order to move intellectual property to the marketplace. This will also be helped by this particular fund. In addition, there's been limited data access across the campuses and to our outside partners so that they can get to our research expertise, our technology clustering, and our market knowledge. As you'll see in a few minutes, we've developed software and other models in order to do that. We also have found that although our entrepreneurial climate is improving, we have numerous student groups at this point in time across the campuses, this is something that needs to mature and that we need to support. And last, our inability to negotiate quickly and move technologies to the marketplace. And I'll show you what we're doing in those areas in just a few moments. Next slide. In the classic approach to managing research, intellectual property commercialization, and research park management, the connections to economic development face many roadblocks and uncertain returns for the investments that have been made by the campuses and the system. To put it in terms of the slide here, these efforts have kind of been boxed in. And so it was time for us to start thinking out of the box, so to speak. To this end, we set the bar to a high level to move us to the next level by redesigning both processes and our organizational structure. Next slide. Later in this talk, I will show you the process and organizational changes. But just looking at this from a different perspective, as shown in this slide, we see that moving from research at the bullseye in the center there, to enterprise creation on the outer ring, companies, jobs, those types of things. This is an interdependent process. And at each one of these rings, there are barriers to overcome that involve more and more, on a cumulative basis, resources and time. In an abbreviated form, this is really our commercialization ecosystem. In addition, we must recognize that skill sets sometimes do not easily transfer across the rings, so that if you are good at evaluating disclosures and IP, you may not be the right person to do license negotiation. So this is a teamwork approach, and this is what we're bringing forward across the campuses. So just like dropping a stone into a pond, where we may set in motion a process that leads to ripples, etc. And the bigger the stone we put in the center, the bigger the ripples we can get. We need to recognize the fact that we need to work across all of these different rings in order to make this occur. For example, we know that in industry, less than 1% of disclosures represent crown jewels, and that 3% have marginal commercial utility. In other words, they barely make enough to pay for the efforts and the activities that went into bringing them to a patented license process. So, what does that mean for us? It means that we must be diligent with each disclosure. Taking them to the marketplace is a long-term commitment by us, which we must manage with a sharp eye on maximizing the return for our limited resources. Next slide. Looking at our accountability measures. Where have we been and what are the benchmarks we will use to measure the future improvements are a part of these accountability measures. We have looked at individual campuses, and those are a part of the accountability document, but for today's presentation, I want to present these from a system perspective, based on data that's gathered by AUTUM, which is the Association of University Technology Managers, and include the following as our peer groups: University of Minnesota, Arizona, the University of Minnesota, Arizona, Indiana, Virginia, Iowa, Iowa State, Penn, Purdue, SUNY, Texas A&M, and Nebraska. As shown in this slide, we have record highs in 4 measures: numbers of invention disclosures received, number of license and option agreements that have generated income, total license and option agreement income, and the number of license and option agreements executed. Next slide. How do we compare to both national averages across all the universities that report to AUTUM? And how do we compare to an institution, in this case Carnegie Mellon, and I think you had Steve Graham talk about Carnegie and some of their things earlier. This is a university I visited here recently, and we shared what we consider to be best practice for the commercialization process. These comparisons are standardized on total research expenditures. So, for example, under the all schools category, approximately 260 of them reporting, they generate 1 intellectual property disclosure for every $2.5 million of research expenditures. As you can see, we are doing much better than that average, and very comparable to Carnegie Mellon University. In the next line, we see that for licenses and options, we have done a very good job over the past 2 years compared to our peers. And why is that? If you see, excuse me, and we look at startups. Can you go back one slide? If you look at the far right-hand corner, far right-hand column, you'll see that in startups, that last line, Carnegie Mellon is really the leader of the pack around the country. They do about 4 times the number that others do. One of the reasons that they attribute this success is this streamlined, non-negotiable term sheet that was actually created by their faculty, which gives them 5% equity moving into a deal. It's non-negotiable, and I said the faculty came up with this, but it basically lays out a term that says we can do this in 1 day. It has great speed and low hassle factor, 2 things that everyone looks for in doing a licensing deal. We have introduced this to our research officers at our last meeting, and we're looking and reviewing this on each of the campuses. But it's something that I hope we'll be able to do for our faculty across the system. Next slide. So although we are pleased with these outcomes over the past 2 years, I believe that we cannot be satisfied that the status quo will keep us moving towards the head of the pack, where we want to be. As you can see from this chart, historically, we have averaged much below where we're at today in signing agreements. And if we see the shape of this curve, we see something that you see many times with new products and services as they mature. They're sort of a sigmoidal or S shape. So we see that this might be something that is starting to level off. How do you change that? You move the curve up by changing processes and structure. Next slide. So as part of our effort this past year has been to put in place an enhanced organizational system. This is one where we have utilized, and the President talked earlier about the $2 million, utilizing these funds to place people out on the campuses, as well as to staff up the both marketing and intellectual property positions for evaluating the technology in a team approach. We believe that this will provide better service to the faculty and will also allow us to better use our limited resources. Our goals have really been to improve the process of inventor disclosure evaluation, improve the time to decision making, focus on high value technology, just not everything that comes along, but those that are high value, and their markets. Transparency and communication, I think, is paramount for the faculty. Faster time to market, and governance provided by an Economic Development Council, which is chaired by the President, where we can then vet these ideas in front of the campus leadership. Because of this, we have now put in place 4 positions on the campuses, 2 positions in marketing expertise in both life science and medical device areas and engineering, and 1 transactional lawyer. Next slide. As you can see, one of the things that I looked into when I first came on board is what were the average number of days from a disclosure to getting a license agreement. Where we fell was at about 3 years on average. That's a long time. And so we set a goal of reducing that to 365 days. So that's our stretch goal. Just as we have set a goal to go from 10 million to 50 million, we've set a goal to go from 3 years to 365 days. Complaints about the ICP process are usually centered around 2 things. 1, the process is slow, which you can see has been documented. And second, the inventors are not informed, and they're not kept informed as things move along. We have set out a system that has been electronically transforming these forms into an electronic tool and portal for the faculty to use. Go to the next slide. Here's just a screenshot of this 3rd leg of the IP commercialization process. It's called the Tech Value Invention Disclosure Evaluation System. We have been beta testing and making minor tweaks to this system using campus input for the past 2 months and are looking for a rollout date in about the next couple of weeks. What are the benefits of this system? It's a time-saving automated process. In other words, a person working at Rolla could actually see what happened in Columbia on a case that was very similar. So it's a database system that allows people complete transparency across the system. It provides for email notification. So now as the licensee and associate finishes any aspect of the evaluation, an email notice is sent to the faculty members saying, we've completed the following. This is where we are at this point in time. Keeps them up to date with what's going on. It's an integrated database, as I said, across the entire system. It allows for what we would consider to be better customer relationship management, or CRM, and the faculty have access to it, so they can see what's actually going on. Next slide. Now I'd like to share with you some data compiled by the Hanover Research Council for a report which was commissioned entitled The Economic Impact of the University of Missouri's Research Operations. This is also will be available on our Research and Economic Development webpage. As you can see from this data, this level of activity in sponsored research supports about 10,000 jobs around this state. We create jobs by doing research, by doing intellectual property commercialization, and by running research parks. We are right in sync with the governor's plan. But, as the president talked about earlier, how do we increase this? We need more facilities. More facilities leads to more jobs. Next slide. As you heard earlier, our commercialization facilities are spread across the state in both rural areas as well as around the campuses. While others like Discovery Ridge have been created within the last 5 years, we have others that have been around for 15 to 20 years. And the Missouri Research Park is an excellent shining example of that. But if we look in total from all of these operations in research parks, it's brought about $34 million back to the university during that period of time. Next slide. Let me just highlight a couple of those. As I mentioned, Missouri Research Park, it supports nearly 2,000 jobs just inside the park itself and approximately 4,500 in the rest of the community. Next slide. Discovery Ridge. This is our latest research park area. And right now, we believe that Merrick has estimated that it would be potential for about 25,000 jobs regionally. And our anchor tenant, ABC Labs, which now has about 250 employees, expects to double that within the next few years. They employ about 40% of university graduates at that. And this is the type of interaction that we want to foster. Next slide. Technology Park at Fort Leonard Wood. This is again another crown jewel, I think, in the university system. Last year alone, it brought us in revenues of over $1 million. But more important than that, this is the only research park on a military base. And we're working now with the developer to develop the other 42 acres that is there. So we've already got 12 acres, 2 buildings. Those buildings are entirely filled. And we have a waiting list. Next slide. Rolla Innovation Park. This is one of the ones that was presented to the board here a while back, is on its way. I believe the contractor has now been chosen there, and just about. Keep getting signals on that. Anyway, this would create not only numerous jobs, but also revenues in the region. Next slide. Missouri Plant Sciences Center. This is really unique. This is one that I've been actively involved with now for a little over a year. This is a joint venture between the City of Mexico, the state, DED, and the University of Missouri. This particular facility will be available to process soybean and other plant-type materials for things like protein powders, drugs, etc. We have already signed our tenant, Soy Labs, which we brought from California, who did this type of processing in Canada, at Saskatoon. They will start moving their materials down, and we will have our final design review coming up this next week so that we can start turning dirt on this. This has been a long process, but it's been, I think, well worth it. It'll make the center of Missouri the processing center for this. I think also you need to consider the fact of the recently announced mapping of the genome of the soy plant by the university researchers. So this goes hand in hand with the types of activities we want to do on a commercialization basis. Next slide. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, in that, and you may have heard, but our heartburn drug, Zegared, is one of the highest yielding of all of our patents for the university system. We have received FDA approval for over-the-counter in December. Schering-Plough would be the ones that will be distributing this. This is a $19 billion market, and it swamps the RX market, which is what we have been working in before. Over the last few years, this has returned about $40 million on the RX market alone. But the $19 billion market is orders of magnitude above that. So we expect great things and great returns on that. And last, our goals. Expand our research partnerships across campuses and across the nation. We want to continue to accelerate momentum for IP commercialization. We want to integrate our research parks and incubators as one marketing theme across the state. Secure funding for future facilities, and continue with the startup funding initiative that the President talked about earlier. I want to thank you, and I'm here to entertain any questions.
On research parks, I don't know much about most of them. I was a little bit involved in the one with money for the Fort Leonard Wood one.
Good.
But probably the oldest one is the one in the St. Louis area.
Yes.
St. Charles.
Missouri.
Been there 25 years or
Yes.
something like that, probably. And my impression has always been, well, that's a nice business park for businesses to be in, but I don't know that I can remember much of any real research that ever came out of there and developed into anything really meaningful. Now, if I'm wrong, I'd be happy to be told
Sure.
I'm wrong, but that's just been my impression of that particular research.
There's been a variety of different businesses in there, okay? However, there are several, like right now, we have Novus, okay, which in order to achieve its LEED Platinum status, they work with Kafner, for instance, at Columbia campus. They also, they're the maker of nutritional supplements, basically, for animals and livestock and things like that, and have done testing and stuff, in fact, with the university researchers. In addition to that, and now this isn't the university itself, it's WashU, but Millipore, basically their entire product line that they produce out of there came out of WashU. So that there is a tie to the university environment.
Are these things that are happening, that they're happening because they're there and that's really made a difference, which I think essentially is what you're trying to do with some of these now, but it just seems anything that did come about would have come about without it being there and that ever.
Not necessarily. I think it's also a part of being by a very entrepreneurial community there in St. Louis. I think that's also the other aspect of it. And they want to be in an environment, okay, where they can share ideas. And so whether it's Nike and their R&D establishment, which is there, working with other, maybe not the university in Missouri, but with other schools around the area, I think that's a very important aspect to this. When we talk to potential clients for Discovery Ridge, for instance, one of the big aspects is their access to students and things like that. And so I think that's very important. And there's a lot of students that are actually.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're, particularly having been involved a bit on the Discovery Ridge covenants, we don't want that to turn into a warehouse for some big retail entity. We want it to be akin to what we can do with our researchers or the academic institutions like in St. Louis, Kansas City, where we have a broader base. But I think that is a bit of a constant thing to guard against. Sometimes it's attractive to say, gee, we could get some space and revenue by having someone bring a warehouse in. Well, that's not the intent of these, quote, research parks. Covenants at Discovery Ridge are very tight in that regard. Covenants that we're working on with Fort Wood, Mexico, are very tight in that regard as well.
That's exactly true. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay. Well, like I said, I don't think the one in St. Louis has ever been all that productive as far as the research aspect of it. It's an okay place for businesses to be. It hasn't hurt anything. But I think it's important to really make sure when we do these things that we're trying to get this research result and the return to the university, which I doubt that it came out of that.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about this Mosira bill and why we need it and our competition with other states?
Sure.
And explain it a little bit too, so
the bill itself and
everybody understands it. Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, what they're doing or saying is that they're going to establish a baseline or a benchmark for all life sciences companies that are in the state of Missouri, as far as what the wage and salary is. Okay. Then, as it incrementally increases, they will take that and they will kind of lockbox that away. Okay. Now, what are they going to use that for? Well, it could be used for a variety of things. But one of the things we run into many times is matching funds from the state. We just do not have a source of matching funds. So when Kansas or any of the other states that we have to compete against for research centers and institutes and things like that, when we are asked by the federal government to provide a match, we usually can't. And so we lose those. Also, just actually recruiting companies in. And I would say, right now in Colombia, we've been doing a very good job to fill our incubator with one company, Pet Screen, which has come from England, okay, and another one, Energetics, which is coming over from Israel. Okay, they will actually take up a good portion of that incubator now. But we were able to attract those. Again, we attracted those because they're working with researchers right at our university there in Columbia. But in many other situations where we're trying to attract companies to come into either Discovery Ridge or one of these others, they have the desire to work with the university, and they want the university to be interacting with them, but they also need startup funds, for instance. We have never been able to provide that. I talked with David Kerr here recently about what he was doing in Kansas, and that was one of the things that was might say the tripping factor. That's what caused it to happen. That's how he brought those companies in. And so now this would be an attempt by the state of Missouri to be able to match those kinds of things and do the same.
I don't know if we're playing a role in that bill or not, but it's certainly important for economic development.
Well, we testify for it. Great coming to it.
Good.
Yeah, exactly. No, and then we talk about it on a consistent basis. No, I think it's an excellent idea. And there are many other programs they're thinking of starting too that are on that same basis, whether it's a sales tax or whether it's an income tax basis. One has to do with the proof of concept fund. This would dovetail very nicely with what the president is proposing, so that we could actually help these companies, these nascent companies, at each stage of the development. So we're very much in favor of that. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Nichols.
Well, thank you.
And I hope the conversations will continue.
Are we running short on time?
No, we're doing fine. Did you have another question?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Warren.
Is Mosira 100% of the tax increment or just some portion of it?
My guess is it's a portion of it, isn't it? Or is it all of it?
Yeah, I think it's to be determined. I think there
okay.
portion of the growth of the income.
So yeah, you're sharing the growth with the state. The concept is that you help seed the success and then share in the.
That's right.
Yeah.
But the thing is that you seed that. Let's say we got one of those institutes. Right? Now we're going to hire 100 scientists in a fairly good wage. It's above the median for that area wherever they place the institute. Now that's going to feed back on itself, right?
Yeah.
So it's self-reinforcing. It's a great idea.
But and not only that, but I might point out, that's what Kansas has been cleaning our clock with over here on the western side. They've had this countless number of losses as a result of the Kansas equivalent of this. So obviously very important. I just want to say, this is incredibly encouraging to me. We have come so far since my term started. I mean, that we can produce. Not only do we set the bar high, but we establish measurable goals and objectives. We measure ourselves against tangible goals and objectives. I mean, I think that's just incredible. The $5 million seed fund, what are we calling that? The investment fund? I think that's a huge step forward. And, I want to really congratulate you and the president, the whole team. I think that is incredibly encouraging. When you look at the economic development mission of the university, it's come light years in the 3 years that our class has been here, and the success there, I think, is remarkable. But I'm particularly proud of the fact that our university is willing to establish benchmarks and then be measured against those benchmarks. And I think when we go down to the legislature, when we go to the people of Missouri and make our case for support, it's strengthened enormously by the fact that we're willing to be measured against our progress. And so, my hat's off to the university team here at the campus and the system level for really bringing us light years in the last few years. I'm very proud of it.
Thank you very much.
Likewise, and I, too, am proud of what Steve's done since he's been on board to work on this team, because a piece of all the tweaking was getting the legal part right. And I know he's still working on another position for us.
That's Steve.
That's Steve, yeah.
My name.
So I appreciate all their efforts to work with you as a team as well.
Can't help to bring this up. I don't disagree with all. In fact, I agree with what was said as far as the development. But you got to watch these bills that divert revenue. You mentioned tax policy in your speech. that is one of the ways that a whole lot of the revenue over the last 15 years got diverted for a whole bunch of things that have decreased the revenue that's available to higher education and other things. So this particular bill, if it's kept down to where it is, and if it just diverts a portion, so there's more coming into general revenue as well as some being set aside for development, you know, that can be fine. But you watch these things, they come down the line, they got a bunch of amendments on it, they end up in being one of these gigantic economic development bills that's diverting money everywhere, and that's not in our best interest if that bill turns into something like that, as many have in the past. So.
Well, I would generally agree with that, and certainly appreciated the President's report on the macro effect of tax credits, and I agree with it. By the same token, understand that Kansas has an angel investor tax credit right now, and Missouri doesn't. And the result is, over here, when an entrepreneur comes up with an innovative idea and needs angel financing, he immediately and automatically moves it to Kansas because his investors can take the angel investment tax credit. So we're losing these entrepreneurs. I happen to know one personally who was a Missouri company that moved to Kansas, not because he liked Kansas better, but because his angel investors could get the tax credit and he couldn't get his upstart going without the tax credit. So I generally share the concept that the President outlined and that Curator Good has outlined here. But let's not forget the importance of the angel investor tax credit and what it does, because our state is bordered by more states than any other state in the country. We have competition on every front, and you know, we have to be competitive. That's why Mosira is important. That's why an angel investment tax credit is important. We don't want them to grow out of scale, for sure. But I don't want the message to come out of here that these things don't do some good.
Well, I would mention historic tax credit. When you match the state's portion of that with the federal, it's 75% of the cost of the project. That's way too much. If something isn't worth entrepreneurial money, somewhere at least 50% of what's going into it, you know, it maybe ought not to be done. So these subsidies should be kept where you can be helpful, but you don't give the store away and you don't encourage people to develop just for the heck of developing.
Yeah, I'm talking about an angel investor who invests in an upstart as opposed to a real estate deal.
Again, thank you, Dr. Nichols. Appreciate it.
Just a quick comment before we leave that subject, Madam Chair. To echo what Curator Erdman said earlier, you know, when we go back a few years, when we started to press the accelerator harder on this economic development thing, one of the things that we were in hopes would happen, we were looking for ways to find things that would resonate with the legislature, and we thought that this was something that they could relate to very well. So hopefully, Steve, Kenora, this will make your job a little bit easier, the success that we're having in this economic development arena, to let some folks know that this state or this university is making a difference in the state, other than, you know, with education research, but we're making a difference in economic development, which should be important to everybody in this state right now. So we're making some strides.
And this accountability measures, we're getting that to every elected official, and that's going over very well as you all know.
That was the plan several years ago when we started this.
Okay, Chancellor Morton.
Well, good morning again, and again, welcome to the UMKC campus. It's been a real honor for us to serve as your host, and I have to tell you, it's difficult for me to say how proud I am of the people who've been presenting to you yesterday, and it's a real privilege for me to be of service to them as their chancellor. Well, as one of your urban research campuses, you've approved a mission that calls for us to be engaged in urban issues. And I don't think our area or our region is that much different from any other. The top urban issues here happen to be jobs, health care, and education. So yesterday when you met with the Faculty Senate was trying to give you a sense of the level of engagement we have in the urban education issue. When they talked about the Institute for Urban Education that's starting to get some national attention, and the Southwest Early College Campus. That's just skimming the surface of a lot of the work that gets done here. Last night, you heard about our Health Sciences Campus and the fact that they are engaged in the urban issues of healthcare. In fact, along with their partners, deliver $150 million a year in uncompensated charity care. Now, today, I wanted to continue in that vein a little bit and talk to you about the jobs side of that. Remember, it's jobs, healthcare, and education. So I wanted to talk about the jobs side of that, but not job creation, but rather what we're doing to help develop and train that workforce to fill some of the jobs that Mike Nichols just talked about. Now, when we talk about that, I want to tell you about some of the challenges we face as an urban campus, what we're doing about those challenges, and then I want to end with a little heads up about a project that can help us to deal with some of the constraints that we have in working through those issues. Now, as soon as you mention urban, I'm sensitive to the fact that as soon as you mention it, we first think about challenges. So I wanted to start by saying this urban campus has some advantages. So I want to start by the first chart, if you will, starts to list the advantages that this urban campus has. Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, if you would list for this region the areas that this region would consider to be the highest sense of pride, it would list the plaza, it would list, you know, the museum right across the street, it would list MRI, it would list Stowers and a number of key spots in this area. Well, they all are centered right around this campus, so we are in a unique location. And given the fact that our average age of our students is a little bit higher, but very diverse, that's not a big issue as much as it is something that enriches the quality of the education that our students receive here. That's what I'm told, and I believe that. And given we are located in a city that has numerous opportunities for employment, our students get opportunities for internships, jobs, and service learning that you can't find in a lot of other places. Those are all advantages. And given that we're a comprehensive research university, there are opportunities here for academic programs and research opportunities you won't find in many other places. Now, we have a student-to-faculty ratio of 12 to 1, and we have competent faculty who care. So I can't tell you how many times I get stopped by students and parents who tell me about the quality of the education that they believe their students receive here at UMKC. Now, we do have our challenges, so I'll get to those next. Because as you probably observed in the report that you had in your board book, we do have a higher percentage of part-time students. We have about 44% part-time. I think UMSL has an even higher percentage at over 50%. The average for the Urban 21 is about 39%. So that is something of a challenge. We also have a higher percentage of students that are exceptions to our admissions requirements. That was also in the report. We have a higher percentage of students requiring financial aid, about 86%. And because our students tend to be more mature, they also have other issues of family and work concerns that distract them from their studies. So the impact of all of that on student success is that we tend to have lower rates of retention and lower graduation rates. Now, when you're trying to produce that workforce to meet those needs and to fill those jobs, that kind of outcome is not acceptable. So the question is, what have we been doing as a campus to address those? Well, as you heard yesterday, we have to start with the pipeline So you heard yesterday about the Institute for Urban Education and Southwest Early College Campus. Lots of work going on to improve the pipeline of students coming in. We didn't talk about it, but we're doing a lot to work with our relationship with the community colleges. We've been working on improving our articulation agreements that focuses on curriculum alignment. Also, once the students get here, it's important that we focus on retention. We've had a team that's focused on retention, and a part of what they've done, there's probably 12 elements to this plan on retention, but a part of it focuses on an early warning system that helps us identify students who might be getting in trouble, and so that we can plan the appropriate intervention. Now, I've mentioned before that if you try to profile the successful student typically lives on campus, has a job, takes a full load, and participates in extracurricular activities. Well, if we're going to continue to help our students to be successful, we have to provide an environment that allows all of that to take place. So a part of what you would see here is that's why you see that we've built new residence halls. We have a new student union that's coming up, allowing students a place to interact more. We have a new soccer stadium. We're expanding the library. In fact, the expansion of the library will put in place a high-density storage and retrieval system, allowing us to take more of the books out of the library into a robotically controlled storage system, allowing students more space to interact and study with each other. Now, all of these initiatives have improved retention. Retention is now up to 74%. So they've had a positive impact on that. And of course, when you improve retention, it also improves enrollment. And so the next chart just shows you the results we've had with enrollment. Now, this past year, enrollment was up about 4.3%. And we believe, in spite of other trends that you might hear about, that there's the potential here for us to continue that trend in this metropolitan statistical area. So the next chart, now I could show you a number of charts related to this, but let me explain what this is. This chart shows the number of students taking the ACT test in a given metropolitan area, within the area. Now, this is how you measure market share. Because when students take the ACT, they can identify 4 schools to which they can send their scores free. And what this tells you is, and we just picked one area because we're here, this happens to be on the Kansas side, but I can show you a number of these on the Missouri side as well. But I did want to show you this one because I believe you know we have a metro rate that applies here. In the Johnson County area, there's 5,200 students who take the ACT with an average ACT of 23.6. And of all the schools that they can send their scores to, UMKC only got 280 of those scores sent to us. So there's an opportunity here to really recruit, because I can tell you that a lot of students there aren't thinking about us. The question is, how do we get them to think about us so that we can improve our ability to recruit? I think that we will certainly be able to increase our numbers, and but as we do that, of course, we have some other constraints, and as I'll show you in the next chart. The one constraint that we have that we really need to deal with involves classrooms. We have on this campus, as we look at those students that we believe we can recruit, and we think about the areas that they're most interested in majoring, we have 5 schools of the 12 on this campus that we believe we're in a position to really grow. And those are the College of Arts and Sciences, the School of Computing and Engineering, School of Biological Sciences, School of Education, and of course our business school. But all of those schools are on this campus, and they all require larger classrooms that are technology enabled. Now, it just turns out that on this campus, we only have 2 classrooms that can seat more than 150 students. So that is a constraint that we have to deal with. And we've known that for some time, and that's why we had a proposal to expand the Miller Nichols Library to add additional classrooms, and especially a large number of large classrooms to accommodate this growth. So, as President Forsey said, when you're in a position like this, that project, of course, required $41 million in state appropriations to get done. So I guess I'm with you in terms of thinking that that's going to be difficult to get, but we still have this need that we have to fill. So as President Forsey said, in times like these, you have to look toward public-private partnerships. So one of the things that I want to tell you about, and this is the last part of this, I wanted to give you a heads up about a particularly exciting project that we hope we have the potential to get that would allow us to address this need. And I want to just walk over here for a minute. What this shows is an aerial view of the administration building here. It's about a block and a half away. The administration building is down here, and across the street is this parking lot. And down in the corner is a small building that has for the Kansas City Young Matrons. It's on the local historic register. And we have another building out there. This is right down the street from, if you would go to the north on this street, on Oak Street, that's where all of our residence halls are. Now, what's important about that is we've been approached by some local developers and presented with a potential project that, in the next slide, could make that area look like this. This facility is a win-win because it would include a development for a grocery store for the neighborhood, but this facility would be made available for the university and could help us address this classroom issue, but could also address a number of other needs that we have on the campus. For example, on the last slide, you'll see that this facility would allow us to accommodate a number of needs that we have that we've not been able to address in the past. Now, these might look like luxuries during these times, but they are really items that we need. For example, we know that we have a very large number of alumni in the Kansas City area. We have no place for them on this campus. We also know that we need a new place for our UMKC Foundation. Our relationship with the alumni is key to our ability to grow this university. So this center could allow for that, but importantly, allow for the establishment of additional classrooms, large classrooms. It would also allow us to renovate the current administration center and include a significant number of large classrooms in that facility. Our issue, of course, is affordability, and we are working with a number of our potential developers locally to see if we can come up with a number of approaches, including significant donor contributions toward this project, and because we have a number of naming opportunities in this potential project, but we would also need a funding strategy, a financial strategy that would be one that we can live with on this project. So just wanted to give you that heads up and tell you that we're hopeful that we can find a way to make this work. We're meeting with a number of local developers to see if we can have a public-private partnership that can help take us forward. That's it.
Thank you. Any questions for him? Thank you, Chancellor Morton. If you will, now turn your attention to the consent agenda. I would assume that all of you have had an opportunity to look through the items. There are 3 items on the consent agenda, and I would entertain a motion to approve all 3 at once.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any conversation? It's been moved and seconded.
Curator Bradley?
Yes.
Curator Carnahan?
Yes.
Curator Downing is absent. Curator Erdman?
Yes.
Curator Frazier?
Yes.
Curator Good?
Aye.
Curator Haggard?
Yes.
Curator Russell? Curator Russell, are you with us?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. We're on the consent agenda vote.
Yes.
Curator Wassinger?
Yes.
Thank you. Go to Baker Freeman.
Okay, next order of business is to hear the committee reports. Academic, Student, and External Affairs Committee. Curator Frazier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We met yesterday, had three information items, and we'll bring to you an action item in a little bit. The first report, Steve Graham gave us a rather extensive report on where the university is in terms of e-learning, and you heard the chair talk about that a lot this morning with some data, and there's probably not a need to rehash all of that, but the fact of the matter is that it is a wave of the future, and we need to be on board with this in a major way, and Steve Graham made it clear that the university is committed to making progress in that regard. The numbers that were shared, and some of this was in Curator Haggard's report earlier, were pretty impressive to me. The classroom only numbers in 2009 are about 15 million, and that's going to go, projected to go in the year 2014 to about 5 million. And some online, which is right now at 10.5 million, is projected to go to about 18.5 million. So those numbers are eye-opening, and we need to be working on that, and indeed we are. So that was the most of Steve's report was centered on online efforts and what we're doing there. Also included in our board packet was information on enrollment. We did not spend a lot of time talking about that, but I did want to just share a few of the highlights out of that packet, that information that was in our board packet. The percentage of increase in enrollment between 2000 and 2009 for the university has increased almost 27%. Missouri S&T is up 47%, MU 34%, UMKC almost 30%, and UMSL about 4%. So we've had tremendous increase in enrollment. And in addition to that, the market share that the university has gained is very, very significant for the state of Missouri during the period of 2002 to 2008. A couple of concerns. One, MS&T is about maxed out on their enrollment growth, and that is a concern, and I think Mizzou is getting approaching that area, so that would be another concern. So things that need to be worked on in the future in terms of enrollment growth. One of the things that I was impressed with in the data that was provided was the way that we manage exceptions to standard enrollment criteria. We appear to be managing the exceptions very well. The success of the students that are exceptions is not significantly different than the students that do meet the normal criteria. I was impressed with that. So while we do make exceptions, we're managing that very carefully. So that's just sort of some of the highlights I garnered out of the enrollment data that was provided. Steve Knorr gave us an update on the legislative efforts, and he started by saying that there are three major concerns in the legislature right now, and those three concerns were budget, budget, and budget. So the efforts in Jefferson City are primarily focused on what happens to the university's budget in the next couple of years, particularly with the year 2012 when the stimulus money is going to be gone and what happens to our budget when that occurs. He also talked a little bit about the competition that we're going to have for state appropriations relative to the funding formula for K through 12. If the legislature is insistent upon fully funding K through 12, where that money is going to come from, so that would be a concern. And then a third highlight that he talked about, something the President talked about at length a little while ago, was the bonding proposal that is bouncing around in Jefferson City. I don't know how much that's going to be, anywhere from $600 to $800 million. And most of that, if it does happen, would come to the universities in this state for capital projects, and it's probably one of the few opportunities, maybe the only opportunity that we're going to have for funding any capital projects, and we should be behind that effort to see that happen. So those were the highlights of, I believe, of Steve Knorr's presentation. We have a couple action items. I'd like to combine them into one. There was some discussion on whether we had a quorum or not in our committee. Thank you, Wayne. So we deferred approval of the minutes and then the approval of the Masters of Science in Explosive Engineering at Missouri S&T to the full board. So I would move that we approve the minutes and of the committee from the previous meeting and the approval of that master's degree. So I make that motion.
Second.
Any conversation, questions? Call for the roll.
Curator Bradley?
Aye.
Curator Carnahan?
Yes.
Curator Downing is absent. Curator Erdman?
Yes.
Curator Frazier?
Yes.
Curator Good?
Aye.
Curator Haggard?
Yes.
Curator Russell?
Yes.
Curator Wassinger?
Yes.
Thank you. It's a vote of 8 no.
That concludes our report, Madam
you.
Chair.
Thank you for your report. Next committee then is Curator Carnahan with the Audit Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Audit Committee met yesterday afternoon. We had 4 information items and I believe 2 action items. We had in the informational items, we reviewed our matrix briefly just to here at the beginning of the year, just to remind ourselves of our goals to accomplish in our 4 meetings in 2010. The next item, we had a complete, very detailed report from John Tvardik of our internal audit team. Gave us a lot of background on the organization and how many man hours were spent and an allocation between partners and all the resources they provide and bring to the university and providing the internal audit function. There's materials that were passed out yesterday and some the PowerPoint presentation included. So then he presented the internal quarterly report. They reviewed 3 audits that had been completed over the last quarter. 2 were at Missouri S&T and on sponsored program activities and the campus police department, and then there was 1 finding of medium risk that has been addressed. And the 3rd audit was on the campus-wide advancement at the University of Missouri at St. Louis, and they put an automated step to reduce the likelihood of double booking of gifts and advancement office of individuals. So steps are being taken, and that's the purpose of the internal audit team and function to give us recommendations and then report back on whether we're accomplishing our goals and our stated plans. Vice President Kravitz reviewed the 2009 fiscal misconduct reporting line annual report, and then in the action items we reviewed our 2009 December 10 meeting, audit committee meetings, and those were approved. And then also we reviewed the action items to retain our external accounting firm as external auditors for the fiscal year 2010. We reviewed the fees and expenses, and they were, I believe, a 2% reduction in fees from the prior year and a 3% reduction in expenses. And this is the first year in the second 5-year annually renewable contract that the board approved last summer. The audit committee moves that KPMG LLP be engaged as the independent auditors for the University of Missouri for the fees as recommended. And we did go into a brief closed session.
Is there a second to this motion?
Yes, I'll second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded.
I'm sorry.
Is there any discussion? If not, let's call the roll.
Curator Bradley?
Aye.
Curator Carnahan?
Yes.
Curator Downing is absent. Curator Erdman?
Yes.
Curator Frazier?
Yes.
Curator Good?
Aye.
Curator Haggard?
Yes.
Curator Russell?
Yes.
Curator Wassinger?
Yes.
Thank you. 8-0.
Do we need to approve our minutes? Do you need a motion for that? I'm sorry. I
We
may.
did that yesterday.
We did? Okay.
As committee.
Okay.
Okay, next order of business is Curator Erdman with compensation and HR.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The Comp and HR Committee met yesterday and took up one information and no action items. The information items was the first annual benefits update that was provided by Vice President Rodriguez and Mike Payden. Thanks for the time that went into that. I think everybody knows that we have really improved our ability to analyze and report on the financial consequences of our benefits programs. The metrics that we have to monitor that and to report that have really improved greatly and provided our stakeholders with a great deal of transparency into our benefits program. The purpose of the update yesterday was to share with the university stakeholders kind of where we see ourselves on our benefits plan. And because all curators were in the meeting, I won't go through the presentation again, but I would like to observe just a couple highlights that at least impressed me. Our benefits remain competitive, but not leading edge in the market. And while we know that our salaries are not competitive and we continue to worry about some of our best and brightest being taken away, we are pleased that at least our benefit program is in the middle of the pack, but it will require continued investment to retain that status. Second observation that I thought's worth kind of understanding is that while we are sound and competitive, we are not without risk, and our health plan and our retirement plan will see increase in costs, and these will be risk items to the university's budget in future years. The good news is that the plans are both sound. Bad news is that they may cost us more going forward, and this will be a challenge for the president and his staff and all of us as we want to make sure that these programs remain sound and fully funded. We talked a little bit about the possible impact of federal and state legislation on our plans, and we'll monitor that closely. And that pretty much covered, in my mind, the highlights from the report yesterday on the benefits update. Having no action items, Madam Chairman, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Warren. Next order of business is the Finance Committee, and Curator Russell is on the phone with us, so I believe he's giving that over to you, Wayne.
Doug, if I forget something or miss something or do it incorrectly, speak up.
Okay.
The Finance Committee heard from the Treasurer, John Miller, yesterday concerning the increase in our investments, pretty much in accord with the market. We had a report on health care, quarterly, I guess the regular quarterly report on health care. We covered several issues on investments, including the termination of the hedge fund manager and reallocation of those funds. Similar discussion regarding the large cap manager funds and a resolution to make a change in managers there. discuss the resident hall fees and food service fees, and we at all campuses, and approved a resolution on those. Looked at the proposed renovation of both Tate Hall and Switzler Hall, and approve the plans to go forward with those, that being paid for out of the bond issue that was approved last June by this board, and funded from renovation funding to pay down that share of the bond issues. And that would conclude my report. And I assume there's several motions. We could pass these motions individually.
Or you can handle it however you wish. If you want to do all 5 separately, or we're thinking maybe you could do the first 3 and the last 2 together, the schematic.
Well, let's see. With the first 2 of them have to do with making changes in our funds, the hedge fund and the large cap. So I would make the motion that one vote be used to and applied to both of those resolutions.
All right, is there a second?
Well, Wayne, David Wassinger, I'm going to vote against number 2 and vote for number 3.
I'll withdraw that motion and make a motion on the hedge fund so that we can have a separate vote.
Second.
Second on this one. And that is the hedge fund manager termination and reallocation.
Right.
Second?
Second.
Discussion? Call for the vote.
Curator Bradley?
Aye.
Curator Carnahan?
Yes.
Curator Downing is absent. Curator Erdman?
Yes?
Curator Frazier?
Yes.
Curator Good?
Aye.
Curator Haggard?
Yes.
Curator Russell?
Yes.
Curator Wassinger?
No.
Thank you.
Okay, the second motion is on the change for the large cap investment from an active manager to a basically an index fund approach to management. And I'll move the adoption of that motion.
Is there a
resolution.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Not, we call for the vote.
Item number 3, Curator Bradley?
Aye.
Curator Carnahan?
Yes.
Curator Downing is absent. Curator Erdman?
Yes?
Curator Frazier?
Yes.
Curator Good?
Aye.
Curator Haggard?
Yes.
Curator Russell?
Yes.
Curator Wassinger?
No. Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, the next resolution is on on the approval of the resident hall fees. I'll move the adoption of that resolution.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? I think we had a good discussion on this yesterday. If not, we call for the vote.
Curator Bradley?
Aye.
Curator Carnahan?
Yes.
Curator Downing is absent. Curator Erdman?
Yes.
Curator Frazier?
Yes.
Curator Good?
Aye.
Curator Haggard?
Yes.
Curator Russell?
Yes.
Curator Wassinger?
Yes.
Thank you.
The next motion will pertain to the renovation of Tate and Switzler Hall. I'll make a motion that one vote be used to apply to both of those resolutions. I'll stop there.
Is there
I'll
a
second that.
Discussion?
Curator Bradley?
Aye.
Curator Carnahan?
Yes.
Curator Downing is absent. Curator Erdman?
Yes.
Curator Frazier?
Yes.
Curator Good?
Aye.
Curator Haggard?
Yes.
Curator Russell?
Yes.
Curator Wassinger?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, that ends the report of the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Wayne. Under general business, we have the good and welfare of the board. And if you will note, you have some information in there about the next board meeting, draft agenda. Look that over, good information for you, and a couple of reports in there that were asked for, I think, by John on our up-to-date expenditures as the Board of Curators. Is there anything else to come before the board today?
Judy, this is David.
Hi, David.
One thing, Robert Stein I saw he had written a memo, which I thought was an excellent job in outlining or looking forward at potential problems for higher ed in Missouri in the future and possible issues. I think we've been doing a very good job on the revenue side of the equation, but frankly, I think Robert Stein, I think, is beginning to look at the expense side, and I think we need to begin taking a look at that for future years. So, as I understand it, he is going to meet with some of the other university presidents and chancellors sometime in February, and I would like to see what the outcome of that meeting is, and we may end up having something on wouldn't mind putting on a planning and resources committee meeting, depending on what the outcome of that meeting with Mr. Stein is, and then I'd like to see if the board could get a report or outline of what that discussion resulted from.
Okay. We can certainly do that, can't we? Yeah, we'll get that done. And then have it at the, maybe get some reports before our next meeting and then decide whether something should be on our agenda.
Maybe just in that regard, there are 2 or 3 upcoming opportunities that will kind of air out the budget. There will be a committee, the Senate committee this coming week, I think the 2nd, where we will be asked to talk about, as I outlined this morning, specific implications of 2011, the 5% cut, and to hypothesize about another cut in 2012. We have been asked the same thing. I think I sent actually to the board a note of the 3 questions we've been asked to address in the House committee on the 16th or 17th. The letter that Curator Wassinger mentioned, we had been asked in December sometime to collaborate on that letter, so that was a input that all of the public higher institutions provided to the department to try to say under what scenarios would different things happen, and I won't go through the points that were made in the letter, but that was with input from all 4-year and perhaps even community college institutions. I believe, David, that they will be talking about that at the upcoming coordinating board meeting, which is the something like the 10th, 11th, 12th. We will be talking about it at the COFA meeting, which dovetails around that same period of time. So over the next month, there'll be plenty of airing about the as-is. Frankly, I'm not sure how much that will occur across the institutions, but we'll give you a report as you suggest on those various meetings that come up.
Anything else?
Are we going to have executive session? Or have we finished that?
We finished.
Let me comment on an issue that was brought up a few minutes ago, and that was in regard to the budgeting and the fact that if there is an effort to fully fund the public school formula, that may affect our situation and our agreement with the governor going forward. I think that is a real danger, and I think the higher education community overall, through COPE or through various ways, ought to really emphasize with the legislature that higher education is every bit as important as elementary and secondary education. They both do their own thing. You know, it's extremely important to get kids started off right, and particularly in the early ed and primary education and so forth. But it's just as important that they end up getting degrees so they can compete in society. And the legislature has always had the tendency to make elementary and secondary the highest priority, and often, and it was worse in years past, didn't take at all the same approach towards higher education. The worst time was back at the downturn in 1980 when Kit Bond came in his second term as governor, and just like now, the revenue just fell off the table. It was gone, and higher education took a hit that they didn't start to recover from or at least 10 years later when we had an upturn in revenue in early 90s. So I think that effort is really, really important, and you just need to get that across. And and I'm not at all talking down elementary and secondary teachers, but when you go through years like we're in now, they end up being the almost only large group, the only really large group of public employees that end up, getting raises when almost no one else in state government, much of local government, higher ed, are getting any wages, and it's because of that effort that's always made to protect elementary and secondary. And I don't diminish their importance at all when I say that, but that's likely to be the case this year, and we really need to look out for that. And Gary, I would urge you to network to the greatest extent possible, as I'm sure you're doing with your colleagues, to put higher education on the front burner with elementary and secondary. And I would say, speaking for myself at least, but I think all of us as curators, if we can help locally and our institutions help locally, I think we'd all be willing to do that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think, some of the terms I tried to use this morning are around collective stewardship across the breadth of education. One of the other tensions that's starting to develop because of the incredible growth of the community colleges. They are feeling a lot of stress around their budgets, and their voice nationally is getting a lot of support, again, as perhaps it should, because of the need to train the workforce and get the workforce pointed in the right direction. Having said that, any tension in our state on elementary, secondary, community colleges, because the state has such little flexibility in its overall budget, we become very vulnerable. So your point is well taken, and as I said this morning, we have to lay claim or stake claim to some of these revenue sources, like on the capital project funding that has clearly historically been allocated to higher education, and we'll have to do that considerately, but we have to make our voice heard.
Hey, Judy, this is David.
Yes, David.
One other thing that I may look at, and I'll be in touch with you or Kathy or someone. We have, and I thought we were kind of at the forefront on it with these accountability measures, which I think provide some transparency. But as I understand it, President Obama's Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, is really pushing K through 12, but also higher ed education to become data-driven, in which we're going to have to provide data, both I think on a private and public universities are going to provide data that may make what we've provided look like child's play compared to what I understand Secretary Duncan. I wouldn't mind getting an update as to what the Obama administration is looking at in terms of data-driven education requirements for public universities and private universities.
Madam Chair, building on Curator Good's comments, which I am in support of, I mentioned yesterday, and for the good and welfare of the university, I believe that the Caring for Missourians initiative that was funded by the General Assembly on a one-time basis was one of the best programs that has come out of Missouri higher education in some time. The partnership that it has created between the community colleges, the four-year institutions, University of Missouri system, and other higher ed institutions, I think, is a model. And it's a shame that that funding was a one-time event. And I have shared with some of my colleagues and the President my own view that that is such an important initiative, training healthcare providers for the aging baby boom population, making sure that we can harvest the benefits of training individuals for a skill set that's going to be in huge demand. The economics of that are so overwhelming, the argument so compelling, and we are so prepared to meet that need and yet don't have the wherewithal to meet the need, that I think the day will come when we're going to need to look at a means of replacing that one-time funding with some other source of funding that would be outside of the appropriations process. And this is an issue that I personally feel very strongly about. I don't have all the answers yet, but it's something that I'm certainly thinking about. And I think as we look forward, we ought to at least begin considering what could be done to, at a minimum, replace the level of funding that was given to the higher education institutions of this state to prepare healthcare professionals for the inevitable swell of demand that will come with the aging of the baby boomer population. Don't have any answer on that today, but it is something that I think is a unique responsibility and mission of the University of Missouri, and hope to have a discussion about that in the future.
Yes, sir.
I want to follow up on that. And this didn't come from kind of the education area, it came from the healthcare area. What I'd heard from others that are interested in healthcare providers and really recognize the need for it, and there was like a 2-day program sponsored by the Missouri Foundation for Health in St. Louis on that last year that I just attended part of. But that money that went into higher education was too scattered, and a number of institutions had real good intact plans on how to utilize that funding where it would have positive results fairly quickly. And because the money was just spread over everybody, there were a lot of institutions, and I couldn't even name the names if I wanted to because I don't know, that were not prepared to use it, and they were therefore put into a position of kind of trying to come up with something that may have been okay or may not. And that was, I'm told again, or heard, that that's one of the reasons why there wasn't a real broad support effort from those people working in the healthcare provider area to really push for that, and which may have made a difference had they done it. They thought that it, in many cases, what was being spent wasn't that effective. Now, that's maybe just discussion and opinions of a number of people, but that's one of the things that I heard that caused that not to get the real broad support that it might have.
Well, that may be, that's not my experience. I've met with the metropolitan community colleges here in Kansas City. Their participation in this was very well targeted, and I don't think that was their view. And I know for a fact the University of Missouri's participation in this was well funded. So with all due respect to that opinion, I would not share that opinion.
Well, I'll be sure everybody had this, but this was a report that actually Steve Graham along with our campuses, spearheaded getting the gathering of the data, which went to the governor in mid-December. If you haven't seen this, it might be worth kind of thumbing through, because I think it would give you a sense of the breadth. Was a perfect no, but the breadth was very substantial. But this was, in fact, you can have my copy.
Good comments from everybody. I, because of my profession, certainly thought it was a wonderful model for collaboration across the state. Where we took the lead, Dr. Lamb developed it so well, and it was such a good idea at the time. It's certainly just the beginning, because as you know, a lot of those professions, 2 years is just 2 years. Got to take a lot more years to get those professions back into our economy to be productive. So I would hope that we could continue to look at it and, again, collaborate and find the funding to do that.
I want to make clear, I wasn't endorsing that criticism. I was saying that it was out there.
Yes. Anything else for the good and welfare?
I just add one thing about we had a very enlightening session yesterday from Steve and about the e-learning, and the part was most alarming to me was what the rapid growth of these private universities. University of Phoenix was at Capella, and what we heard from some of these professors was that one thing they have much better than the public universities was customer service. And if we could hear more about what we need to do to be competitive on our customer service in the future at some point, to be competitive with these private universities. I mean, University of Phoenix has 400,000 students now, I think they said, and they're growing at a much faster rate than the public universities are, and that really could be one of our biggest competitors in the future. So we need to do something, apparently, about our customer service. And we'd love to hear more about what we are doing in that respect.
And I think Steve and President Forsey have some things in place to address that. Certainly the consumer, the students are being a part of all this planning. They are our future, and they are the people that are going to tell us what they need and what they want. Any other comments? It's a good meeting. I think we brought up lots of good information this time and some new things to be thinking about. I'm amazed by what's in the Chronicle with all the things that are changing in regard to the way students learn and university settings and how they're going to have to survive to meet those needs. So keep reading your Chronicle articles that come across every day, too. Any other comments? If not, we'd call for a motion for adjournment.
So move.
Second.
Call for the vote.
Curator Bradley?
Aye.
Curator Carnahan?
Yes.
Curator Downing is absent. Curator Erdman?
Yes.
Curator Frazier?
Yes.
Curator Good?
Aye.
Curator Haggard?
Yes.
Curator Russell?
Yes.
Curator Walker?
Yes.
Thank you.
Meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, Kathy. I
Thank you.
appreciate your
Thanks,
hooking up
Kathy.
on that.